I just moved into this old apartment complex. When the middle-aged man downstairs called the cops on me, he claimed I was screaming songs at the top of my lungs. In the middle of the night, when the tenant association showed up at my door, he was red-faced and shaking with rage. He pointed his finger at my face and started cursing. "You little brat. Every night at 11 sharp you start howling. The whole building can't sleep because of you. I've recorded everything. Your voice sounds like a dying pig. You're going to give me a heart attack." Hallway was packed with neighbors who had been woken up. Someone kicked my door hard and called me a low-class trash. Trash like her should be kicked out of the complex. She looks decent, but she's just a loudmouth hoodlum from the clubs. Under their hateful glares, I slowly pulled out my phone. I typed 2 lines and held it up. How exactly is a person born mute supposed to sing? The neighbor who had been kicking my door froze instantly. The man leading the charge, Jagger, kept his hand frozen in midair. He looked like he had seen a ghost. Everyone shifted their gaze to my phone screen. Mrs. Miller, the head of the tenant association, was a busybody who thought she had seen it all. She blinked, then narrowed her eyes. She looked annoyed as if she thought I was playing a prank on her. "Listen, girl. Don't try to be clever with us. Just admit it. It's not just Jagger. I live in the opposite building and even I could hear you." Jagger suddenly exploded into a sharper, more frantic scream. "See, she's lying. She's just trying to dodge the blame. I even have evidence." He turned his phone volume to the max and clicked on an audio file. A sound like a ghost howling immediately filled the entire hallway. "Listen. Everyone listen. That's her singing." Jagger pointed at me, his finger nearly poking my eye. "Every night at 11, right on time. My heart condition is acting up because of this." The shouting stirred the neighbors up again. Jagger is right. That sound is pure mental torture. My old man had a heart episode last night because of it. She gets to have her fun, but what about the sick and elderly? If someone dies from the stress, can she take responsibility? She's just a coward who won't admit her mistakes. Young people these days have zero accountability. One woman even aimed her phone camera directly at me. "I'm recording this. I'm going to post your face online and let everyone see what a piece of work you are." I looked at the mob, feeling a wave of exhaustion. Typing on a phone wasn't enough to explain this nightmare. I took a deep breath and typed another line, quickly shoving it in Mrs. Miller's face. "Give me 20 minutes. I'm calling my certified ASL interpreter. We can communicate properly." Then Mrs. Miller and the neighbors were stunned. An interpreter? They probably thought I was just stalling for time. Mrs. Miller looked at me suspiciously but finally nodded. "Fine. We'll give you 20 minutes. I want to see what kind of tricks you're trying to pull." 20 minutes later, a woman in a sharp professional suit pushed through the crowd. "Hello everyone. I'm Linda, the contracted sign language interpreter for Sylvia." Her voice wasn't loud, but it was firm and clear. It quieted the noisy hallway instantly. "I will be accurately relaying everything Sylvia has to say." Linda's presence brought a professional, undeniable weight to the scene. Mrs. Miller and Jagger exchanged a look. They clearly didn't expect me to actually bring someone. I began to use sign language to defend myself. Linda translated my gestures into words. "Sylvia says she has been nonverbal since birth. She has medical records from a top-tier hospital and is happy to cooperate with an official verification." I pulled out a yellowed medical certificate. When they saw the official seals and signatures from the state-certified hospital, the crowd went quiet. I had kept that paper in my bag ever since my last checkup. I never thought it would come in handy like this. Furthermore, in the recording Mr. Jagger played, the voice is raspy and processed. It clearly belongs to a middle-aged male. It does not match Sylvia's gender, age or physical condition. Finally, she strongly doubts the authenticity of this recording. She reserves the right to seek professional forensic analysis and sue the person responsible for forgery. Every word hit like a hammer. The angry neighbors were now looking at each other confused. Jagger was the first to snap. He turned red with embarrassment and rage. "Bull. She's just hired an actress. Forensic analysis. Who do you think you are? That hospital note was probably just printed 5 minutes ago. You're willing to fake legal documents just to lie. Aren't you afraid of jail?" Mrs. Miller's face darkened again. "Sylvia, don't think bringing a helper will let you flip the truth." She stepped forward, looking at me aggressively. "You keep saying it's not you and you don't have the equipment. Fine. Do you dare to open your door and let us see for ourselves? If you're innocent, we'll apologize in front of everyone. But if we find evidence, humph." The crowd erupted again at her words. "Yeah, open the door. Let us in. If you won't open it, it means you're guilty." All their eyes were like sharp blades cutting into me. They didn't want the truth. They just wanted an excuse to trample on my dignity. My front door was pushed open, and the mob swarmed in. The cozy home I had spent so much time decorating was instantly invaded by strangers. Mrs. Miller acted like a general, waving her hand. "Everyone help me look. See if there are any microphones, speakers, or recording gear. Jagger led the way, charging straight into my bedroom, which also served as my studio. The neighbors weren't polite. They tore through my closets and threw open my drawers. Their faces were filled with excitement and disgust, as if they were on a holy mission. I stood in the middle of the living room like a prisoner on display. I felt cold all over. However, 10 minutes passed and they had turned the place upside down. They didn't find a single microphone, let alone professional sound cards or speakers. The crowd started to murmur. Some looked bored or annoyed. Just then Jagger, who was still digging through my desk, let out a loud shout. I found it. Everyone come look. Here's the evidence. Everyone rushed toward his voice. My heart skipped a beat as I looked toward the studio. Jagger was sitting at my computer, pointing at the screen. Through the gap in the crowd, I saw it. He had quickly pulled a black USB drive from his pocket. While my computer was still on, he plugged it into the tower. His movement was sneaky, but it didn't escape my eyes. So that was his game. My heart sank to the bottom of my chest. Listen to this. Jagger turned my speakers to full volume and clicked a file. This is it. This is the sound we hear every night. That ghost-like howling filled the room again. On the desktop, the icon for that audio file was glaringly obvious. The neighbors exploded. Any doubt they had left vanished instantly. God, the evidence was right on the computer. I knew it. Why would Jagger lie about something like this? Turns out she didn't need equipment. She just recorded it on her PC. Young people these days. A wave of insults and disgust crashed over me once more. Linda, standing next to me, turned pale. She tried to defend me. Please, everyone, stay calm. We don't know where this file came from. It could have been. But her voice was swallowed by the roar of the mob. You're in on it with her, aren't you? Stop lying. We don't want scammers like you in our neighborhood. One older woman even shoved Linda hard. Get out. You have no say here. Linda was just a professional woman. She was no match for this angry mob. She was shoved and pushed out the door looking completely frazzled. Now I was truly alone. Mrs. Miller saw this and gave a smug smile. She walked up to me with a fake look of concern. Look, girl. Take my advice. The evidence is right here. There's no point in lying anymore. Everyone makes mistakes when they're young. If you're willing to change, we're willing to give you a chance. She pulled a pre-printed paper and a pen from her pocket and put them on my coffee table. Here, sign this confession. Promise you won't disturb the peace at night anymore. We'll just sign it and follow the procedure. Then this can all be over. It's better for everyone. I actually laughed. I had come prepared. I slowly lifted my head and met Mrs. Miller's confident gaze. Then I firmly signed the word no in the air. I reached out and grabbed the pen and the paper. Using every ounce of my strength, I tore that confession into tiny pieces. The torn pieces of the confession paper fluttered down like dirty snow, settling over the toes of Mrs. Miller's sensible leather shoes. For a span of 3 seconds, the room was so still I could feel the faint vibration of the refrigerator kicking on through the floorboards. Being deaf doesn't mean you live in a void. You become hyper-aware of the physical weight of silence. Right now, the silence in my living room was heavy, volatile, and suffocating. Mrs. Miller stared at the shredded paper, her mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. The smug, maternal mask she had worn completely melted away, replaced by a deep, ugly shade of magenta that crept up her neck. You, she started, her voice a reedy tremble that I couldn't hear but could read perfectly on her lips. You ungrateful little bitch. Jagger didn't bother with words. The physical vibration of his heavy footsteps pounded through the floor as he lunged forward. I didn't step back. I didn't blink. I just stared dead into his bloodshot eyes. Before his thick fingers could grab my shoulder, a sudden, violent shove sent him stumbling sideways. Linda. She hadn't left. She had been pushed out into the hallway, but she had fought her way back in her usually pristine blazer now, wrinkled, her hair out of its tight bun. She stood between me and Jagger, her phone gripped tightly in her hand. The screen was lit up, showing an active call. With 911. I told them there's a violent home invasion in progress. Linda shouted, her voice carrying enough authority to make the front row of neighbors flinch. The police are 2 minutes away. Anyone who doesn't want a breaking and entering charge had better step back right now. The word police acted like cold water on a grease fire. The mob's righteous fury instantly fractured into nervous murmurs. The woman who had been filming me lowered her phone, suddenly very interested in the floorboards. A few of the neighbors hovering near the front door quietly slipped out into the hallway, their courage evaporating at the threat of legal consequences. But Jagger was too far gone. He had committed to the lie, and he was drowning in it. Let them come, he roared, spitting as he spoke. He pointed a trembling, fat finger at my computer monitor. The evidence is right there. You think the cops are going to care about some deaf girl's sob story when I have proof? I'm the victim here. My heart condition. Save it for the judge, Linda snapped, standing her ground. I gently touched Linda's elbow and offered her a small, tight smile of gratitude. She had gone above and beyond her contract tonight. I pulled out my phone, opened my notes app, and typed rapidly. I handed it to Linda. She read it aloud to the room, her voice dripping with ice. Sylvia says nobody is leaving. In fact, if anyone attempts to flee this apartment before the police arrive, she will provide the hallway security footage to the authorities to ensure every single person who forced entry is identified. A collective gasp swept through the room. You can't do that, a man near the back protested. We were just looking out for the building. You illegally entered a private residence and ransacked my belongings, Linda. Read my next typed sentence. That is a felony. I hope you all have good lawyers. Mrs. Miller tried to regain control of her crumbling battalion. She puffed out her chest, straightening her cheap pearl necklace. Now listen here, Sylvia. Let's not blow this out of proportion. We found the file. The noise violation is a civil matter, but if you involve the police, they're going to see that you've been terrorizing this building. We were conducting a citizen's wellness check. She didn't get to finish her absurd justification. The heavy, rhythmic thud of combat boots hitting the stairwell reverberated through the floor. 2 seconds later, the crowd at my front door parted like the Red Sea. 2 police officers, a tall, broad-shouldered man and a sharp-eyed female officer, stepped into my living room, their hands resting cautiously on their duty belts. All right, what's going on here? The female officer demanded. Her name tag read Vance. Dispatch said there was a home invasion, but this looks like a town hall meeting gone wrong. Jagger immediately threw his hands up in mock surrender, adopting a sickeningly pathetic expression. Officers, thank God. I'm the one who called the building down. We have a severe noise dispute. The girl who lives here, she's deranged. She plays screaming noises at night to torture us. We came to talk to her, and she got violent. Officer Vance looked around the trashed room, the pulled-out drawers, the clothes scattered on the floor, the shredded paper on the coffee table. Then she looked at me, standing calmly in the center of the wreckage, and Linda, who was visibly shaking with adrenaline. She got violent? Vance asked dryly. Yes. Mrs. Miller piped up, slipping into her sweetest, most concerned citizen voice. I'm Mrs. Miller, head of the Tenant Association. We've had dozens of complaints. We came to confront her with the evidence, and she tore up the official warning. The proof is right there on her computer. Officer Vance's partner, Officer Miller, walked over to my desk. Jagger eagerly followed him, his chest puffed out. Look, right on the desktop. The audio file. She blasts it every night at 11. Officer Miller reached for the mouse. No. I clapped my hands together. A sharp, piercing crack that made both officers jump. I frantically signed to Linda. Stop. Please don't touch the computer. Linda translated loudly, stepping forward. Officer, my client is deaf and nonverbal. I am her certified interpreter. She is explicitly requesting that you do not touch the computer, the keyboard, or specifically the black USB drive plugged into the front of the tower. Vance narrowed her eyes. Why not? I signed rapidly, my hands a blur of precise, angry motions. Linda's voice rang out, clear and unwavering. Because that USB drive does not belong to her. The man standing next to the desk, Jagger, planted it there 3 minutes before you arrived. The room erupted. Liar! Jagger screamed, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. She's making it up. She's a manipulative little snake. I didn't touch anything. She's lying to save her own skin. Mrs. Miller shrieked, pointing a manicured nail at me. We all saw it. It was already there. Quiet. Officer Vance bellowed. The command was so loud that I saw the neighbors physically flinch. Vance turned to me. That's a very serious accusation, ma'am. He planted it in front of 30 people. I nodded slowly. Then, I walked over to the TV mounted on my living room wall. I picked up the remote and switched the input. What the neighbors didn't know, what Mrs. Miller in her infinite arrogance had failed to realize, was that when you cannot hear a window breaking, a door opening, or footsteps creeping up behind you, you adapt. Security wasn't just a luxury for me, it was a necessity. I had discreet, high-definition motion sensor cameras installed in the corners of my living room and bedroom studio. They recorded directly to a secure cloud server, not my PC. I opened the app on my phone and cast my screen to the television. The 55-inch display flickered, then pulled up a crystal-clear, full-color feed of my bedroom from exactly 15 minutes ago. The timestamp in the corner. Read 20:03. The room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. On the screen, the mob was tearing through my room. People were ripping shirts off hangers. But the camera angle perfectly captured the computer desk. It showed Jagger hovering near the tower. It showed him looking over his shoulder, checking if anyone was watching him. Then in sharp 1080p resolution, it showed Jagger reaching into his right pants pocket. It showed his thick fingers pulling out a black Kingston flash drive. It showed him shielding the computer tower with his body as he quickly jammed the USB into the open port. Finally, it showed him pulling the mouse to navigate the screen before suddenly shouting to the room, pretending he had just found it. I hit pause right on the frame where the USB was halfway out of his pocket. I turned around to face the crowd. Jagger looked like he had been struck by lightning. His jaw hung open. The color had completely drained from his face, leaving him a sickly grayish-white. Sweat beaded instantly on his forehead. He backed away from the computer desk as if it were on fire. Mrs. Miller stared at the screen, her eyes wide, her mouth trembling. She looked from the TV to Jagger, then back to the TV. The neighbors who had been backing Jagger up moments ago suddenly looked sick to their stomachs. They realized in real time that they had been weaponized. They had broken into a disabled woman's home, destroyed her property and hurled horrific abuse at her, all based on a fabricated lie. Officer Vance broke the silence. She slowly unclipped the radio from her shoulder. Dispatch, we're going to need a secondary unit to this location. We have a suspect for evidence tampering, breaking and entering, and filing a false police report. Vance turned her piercing gaze to Jagger. Sir, step away from the desk and put your hands behind your back. Wait, no. Jagger stammered, his voice cracking. He held his hands up defensively. It's fake. It's a deep fake. She's a computer whiz, she edited that video right now. I swear to God. Officer Miller scoffed, pulling his handcuffs from his belt. She edited a flawless, real-time video of you planting a drive in the span of 3 minutes, while standing in the middle of a hostile crowd. Save it, buddy. Turn around. No. You don't understand. Jagger shrieked, physically wrestling with the officer as Miller grabbed his wrist. She's the one making the noise. She's ruining my life. I tapped Linda's arm and signed again. Sylvia would like to add one more thing, Linda said, her voice cutting through Jagger's pathetic struggles. If you check the metadata on that USB drive, she guarantees the audio file's creation date will predate her signing the lease for this apartment. Furthermore, she suspects the drive itself is registered to a computer owned by Jagger. Vance raised an eyebrow, looking at the sweating, panicking man now pinned against my closet door. Is that right, Jagger? Jagger stopped fighting. He slumped against the wood, breathing heavily, his eyes darting around like a cornered rat. He had nothing left. The illusion was entirely shattered. Why? Mrs. Miller suddenly demanded, stepping toward Jagger. Her voice was shrill with panic, desperate to distance herself from the sinking ship. Why would you do this, Jagger? You told me you hurt her. You swore on your mother's grave it was her. I didn't need to hear to understand the betrayal in her voice. But I also knew Mrs. Miller wasn't a victim. She had enjoyed the power trip. She had wanted to evict me because she didn't like people who were different moving into her pristine, gate-kept community. Before Jagger could answer, another neighbor, a young guy in a tech company, hoodie who had been quiet the whole time, spoke up. Wait a second, the young man said, looking at Jagger. If she wasn't making the noise, then who was? Because I live on the 3rd floor and I've been hearing that howling every night at 11 p.m. for a month. It definitely wasn't a hallucination. The room grew very still again. Officer Vance looked at the young man, then at me and finally down at Jagger. Jagger, Vance said slowly. Where is your apartment located in relation to this one? Jagger closed his eyes. He didn't answer. He lives in 2B, Mrs. Miller whispered, the horror dawning on her face. Directly below Sylvia. The pieces fell into place with a sickening thud. I signed to Linda, my gestures sharp and furious. Sylvia says, Linda translated, that she believes Jagger has been blasting the noise himself, directing it upwards at his own ceiling to make it seem like it was coming from her unit. But why? The young man asked. Why go through all that trouble just to frame a random girl? I walked over to my desk, picked up my tablet, and pulled up a PDF I had saved 3 days ago. It was an email exchange I had managed to pry out of the property management company when I first suspected someone was messing with me. I handed the tablet to Officer Vance. What am I looking at? Vance asked. Sylvia requested the waiting list records for this unit, Linda explained. Jagger's nephew was next in line for this apartment. It's the only rent-controlled unit left in the building with a balcony. When Sylvia's application was approved because of a disability housing priority mandate, Jagger's nephew lost the spot. Jagger wanted to drive her out so the unit would go back on the market. The sheer pettiness, the malicious, calculated cruelty of it, hung in the air. He had tortured the entire building, risking his neighbor's health and sanity, all to mentally break a deaf woman so his relative could get cheap rent. You sick son of a bitch, an older woman spat at Jagger. She was the same woman who had shoved Linda earlier. My husband had a panic attack because of you. You're disgusting, another neighbor yelled. Suddenly, the mob that had been ready to string me up was now directing all its vitriol at Jagger. The hypocrisy was nauseating. 10 minutes ago they were eager to ruin my life without a shred of proof. Now they were playing the righteous victims. I wasn't going to let them off the hook. I clapped my hands again. Hard. The sharp noise made the room go quiet. I stepped into the center of the living room, my eyes sweeping over every single face. I pointed at my overturned dresser. I pointed at my shattered ceramic lamp on the floor. I pointed at the ripped clothes and the muddy footprints grinding into my rug. Then I looked at Mrs. Miller. I signed, my movements large, sweeping, and undeniably commanding. Linda took a deep breath, her posture straightening. When she spoke, she channeled every ounce of my cold, boiling rage. Sylvia says that Jagger may be going to jail, but he did not destroy her home alone. Every single person in this room who crossed her threshold, who touched her belongings, and who participated in this harassment is guilty of trespassing and vandalism. The neighbors shrank back, their faces pale. Mrs. Miller, Linda continued, staring a hole through the tenant association. President, you abused your position of authority to incite a mob. You forged a false confession document under duress. Sylvia will be filing a massive civil lawsuit against the tenant association, the property management company, and you, personally. Mrs. Miller staggered backward as if she had been slapped. Sylvia, please. We're deceived. We didn't know. I pulled out my phone, opened the camera, and held it up. I began snapping photos, flash after flash, illuminating the terrified faces of the neighbors who had kicked my door in. Sylvia requests that officers Vance and Miller collect the names and IDs of every person in this apartment before they are allowed to leave, Linda stated firmly. If anyone refuses, she will add their face from the security footage to the police report. Officer Vance nodded, a hint of a grim smile playing on her lips. Happy to oblige. Nobody moves. Miller, call for backup to process the scene. Let's start taking statements. The next 2 hours were a bureaucratic nightmare for the intruders. More police arrived. Jagger was formally arrested, read his rights, and dragged out in handcuffs. As he was led through the hallway, he didn't look at me. He kept his head down, broken and humiliated, the bravado completely stripped away. Mrs. Miller tried to argue with the police, citing tenant bylaws, but Vance quickly shut her down, informing her that if she interfered with the investigation, she would be arrested for obstruction. Defeated, Mrs. Miller handed over her ID, her hands shaking so badly she dropped it twice. One by one, the neighbors were processed, warned, and kicked out of my apartment. Some tried to apologize to me on their way out. I'm so sorry, sweetie, one older woman whispered, reaching out to touch my arm. I stepped back, out of her reach, and gave her a look so cold she visibly shivered. I didn't want their apologies. Apologies wouldn't unbreak my lamp or erase the memory of their hateful, eager faces when they thought they had me cornered. I just wanted them to pay for what they broke, and then I wanted them to leave me alone. By 1 a.m., the apartment was finally empty of the police and the mob. It was just me and Linda. The silence had returned, but this time, it didn't feel heavy. It felt like cool water. It belonged to me again. I walked over to the kitchen counter, poured 2 glasses of water, and handed one to Linda. She took it with a weary, grateful smile. She kicked off her heels and slumped onto the one undamaged armchair in the living room. Well, Linda sighed, taking a long drink. That was certainly one of the more intense translation jobs I've ever taken. You don't pay me enough, Sylvia. I chuckled, a silent, breathless motion of my shoulders. I picked up my phone and typed a message showing it to her. Double your standard rate for tonight, plus a hazard pay bonus. Linda read it and laughed out loud. I'll hold you to that. She looked around. The wrecked apartment, her smile fading slightly. Are you going to be okay here tonight? I can stay, or we can get you a hotel. The property management will definitely have to foot the bill. I looked at my overturned furniture. It was a mess, yes, but it was my mess now. The invaders had been repelled. The monster downstairs was in a holding cell. I felt a strange, profound sense of peace. I had fought for my space, and I had won. I typed a final message and showed it to her. I'm staying. The howling is finally gone. I think I'll sleep perfectly. Linda smiled, a genuine warm expression. She stood up, grabbed her shoes, and
slung her bag over her shoulder.
Good night, Sylvia. Lock the door. And call me when you're ready to interview lawyers. I know a few sharks who would love to tear Mrs. Miller to pieces. I walked her to the door, signed a heartfelt thank you, and watched her walk down the quiet hallway. After I locked the deadbolt and engaged the chain, I stood in the entryway of my apartment. I couldn't hear the wind outside. I couldn't hear the traffic from the distant highway. But as I walked into my bedroom, picked up my broken lamp, and tossed it into the trash, I felt the unmistakable, steady rhythm of my own heartbeat. It was strong. It was fearless. And for the first time since I moved in, it was the only sound in the house.